Thank you for joining us today. Hello and welcome to From Lansing with Love. I'm your host, State Representative Leslie Love. Every month we discuss a different topic with interesting guests. I hope you find this program both informative and insightful. On August 20th, 1619, 20 and odd Angolians from southern Africa, kidnapped by the Portuguese, arrived in the British colony of Jamestown, Virginia, on a British warship and were then bought by English colonists. The arrival of the enslaved Africans in the New World marked the beginning of 2.5 centuries of slavery in North America. That event 400 years ago had a major impact on the history of the United States that is still being felt today. 2019 marks 400 years of the African experience in America that has been christened the African American Quad-Centennial. My guest to talk about the Quad-Centennial today is Bishop Mbiyu Chui of the historic Shrine of the Black Madonna #1 in Detroit, Michigan. It is one of the Pan African Orthodox Christian churches and also a part of my family of churches, the UCC Church. As director of the Pan African Ministries, he travels extensively across West Africa, spreading the gospel and building churches. Thank you, Bishop Chui, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So I have to tell you, I was very excited. I know one of your members of your church and her family, and she was very enthusiastic. She came to me and said, my church and my bishop, we're doing this Quad-Centennial. And I said, well, tell me more. and she started to explain it, and I got so excited. And I said, this is information, we need to tell people about this. So, Bishop, please tell us, the viewers, what is the Quad-Centennial and why is it relevant today?
Sure. The Quad-Centennial marks the 400-year presence of African Americans in this country. We know that prior to celebrating our arrival here in 1619 that there were Africans present in North America. But we're talking about the event that triggered the trail of Africans being brought to this country over time, what we know in history as the transatlantic slave trade. Right. So it officially kicked off in 1619 when those Angolans were taken from that ship. And what came to follow that event is what created this country that we call America. So that's why that historical marker is so important. But I also think it's important because it represents the legacy that we created as Africans in America, which ought to be commemorated. Right. And when I say the legacy, I'm saying all the sacrifices, all of the struggles, all of the challenges that our ancestors have overcome in order for us to be where we are today. Right. So that's a legacy that we have to embrace and to uplift. So that's why the Quad-Centennial is important.
Okay. So how did you and the Shrine of the Black Madonna get involved in this? And was it a part of a network of churches doing this across the nation, or did you initiate this?
Okay, that's a good question. Our presiding bishop, Jaramogi Menelik Kimathi, came up with the idea that this historical marker was coming and that we ought to be involved in promoting it. And so in the initial stages, we kind of shopped it around to different organizations, museums, national black organizations, historians at universities and colleges around the country. And everybody who we shared it with, embraced the idea, yes, this is worth us getting together and collaborating on. And so initially we partnered with the National Museum of African American History in D.C. And they took the role of kind of bringing organizations and churches and other groups in under the umbrella and pushing the agenda of commemorating. And then in Texas, there was a bill passed by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee to commemorate the Quad-Centennial. And a partnership was formed with the president of Ghana, encouraging African Americans to come back home and visit the motherland. So there were initiatives taking place in different areas around the country, and we just kind of converged all of that energy together and tried to bring as many people as we could under the umbrella of embracing this year, 2019, as the Quad-Centennial year.
Well, that's significant, and I thank your church for your leadership on that. So when people gather, what were some of the things that you wanted to make sure that people was covered at the conference? What do we need to know and remember and to do if there was an agenda kind of moving forward?
Okay, so the basic agenda was to bring awareness, to bring understanding and enlightenment of our history and why that's important, what we have contributed to the country in terms of our gifts, talents, abilities, skills, ingenuity, creativity, and to lift that up. And I think one of the biggest takeaways has been the importance of educating our youth and passing on this knowledge to the next generation. And one of the things that happened, which was not a part of our initial idea, was that the Quad-Centennial was embraced in a way by the media that made a very profound impact, and I think it will also moving into the future. I don't know if you've heard of the New York Times 1619 Project.
Yes.
Yeah, but did you see the magazine?
I didn't see the magazine.
Awesome. They did an awesome job of telling the story. And not only did they tell the story in that magazine, and they also put together a curriculum, an educational curriculum to pass on this knowledge to elementary, middle, and high schoolers.
So were you able to partner with any local arts or culture, historical institutions in metropolitan Detroit to try to, okay, who were some of those?
The Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Throughout this year, we've had several events around the city of Detroit. We had our first one at Kwanzaa in 2018 in December at the Charles H. Wright. And then we had one at our own church at the Shrine in February. And we had two other community events, one in June and one in August. Okay. So we had a series of events leading up to the convention in Atlanta.
Will there be more for the rest of this year?
Absolutely. Okay. So between now and the end of the year, we have two more events scheduled. One is in November, and that's a tribute to the veterans and all of the sacrifices of African Americans who fought in every war in this country. So we're gonna be paying homage, paying honor, recognizing some of those who are still living. And so that's going to be a big celebration at the Shrine. It's going to be November the 16th. And then in December, we're going to close the year with another Kwanzaa celebration honoring the Quad-Centennial.
Well, here's something interesting. To look at our history of Africans coming to America, and at the Charles Wright Museum, they have this permanent installation that really takes you through this journey in its way. And the significance and relevance of how you have seen, if at all, young people take in this information. Because it seems, I mean, just when you look at 50 years since the Civil Rights Act was passed, 55 years, and then, and some people think that was way back then, you know. It's so far removed from a person's experience now. The payphone is so far removed from a youngster's experience now. How do you see the significance of this and the educating of that relevant to young people today? That's
an excellent question. One of the things we did at the Quad-Centennial is we spent the first day, we took a bus tour, and we went to Montgomery, Alabama, to the Museum of Peace and Justice. And that museum captured the history of lynchings in America. But it didn't just tell the story of lynchings in America. It also told the story of all the way up to today and mass incarceration and the impact that has created for us in this country. So it really brings history into the present, and it's an interactive museum. And I encourage everybody to take a trip. It's a family event, to take a trip to Montgomery and to see this museum and to get involved in the current issues, challenges, and struggles in our community that are still the after effects, the aftermath of that period of history. So I would like to see the same thing happen as we move forward to elevate our historical memory by encouraging our museums to do these kinds of connect the dot
Do you think black
displays.
people, particularly in Michigan, I'm just going to talk about us right here, metropolitan Detroit, get it? Do we still have the respect and kind of understand the significance of it? Because even sometimes in these moments of serving in the legislature, what we do as lawmakers, when you talked about incarceration, how that imprisonment of people, the unfair, unjust treatment, particularly of people of color and African Americans, all of that impact. And do we really get it? And where and what is the paradigm shift? Because sometimes I go, I don't know. And what needs to I feel like we need there were moments in life in our history where we had these great moments, whether it was the assassination of Dr. King or the passing of the Civil Rights Act. There were these things that you can see, these
Yes.
movements.
Yes.
And that doesn't seem to be as prevalent now,
Right.
that to kind of jerk us into,
Yeah.
it's not over. It's still
Yeah.
a lot of work
Yeah.
to be done. What do you see?
Absolutely. Well, what I see is that we haven't done a good job of telling our own story. So it's really about telling our own story and retelling that story in a different context. If you just think about the paradigm that we've been taught, American history, it totally excludes the role and the responsibilities that African Americans had in the development of this country. And so if we focus on the root of the problem, and that's what the problem is our historical memory is flawed. And if we go back to that issue and try to put more energy, time, resources into developing a historical narrative that reflects totally what this country is and who this country represents, then it'll change our paradigm. There can be no paradigm shift without a correct historical memory. So I really think that's where we have to focus and concentrate.
Yes. Well, do you know any of the names, when you talk about the historical context of this, or personal stories of men and women who were a part of that voyage in 1619 to America?
All those names were anonymous. There was no written record of those names. That group of Africans we know they were from Angola. We know that they were on a Spanish explorer. We know they were sold in Comfort Village in Jamestown. And that's really all the record shows. We don't really have any details about their lives and what happened to them.
Isn't that significant?
Absolutely.
Even as we relate now as black people to be able to trace our lineage and all the Ancestry.com and those programs to find out where do my people come from. And not even 5 generations, but like who's the great-great-great-grandmother and grandfather, and not writing that history down. What is the Shrine of the Black Madonna you have done around that?
Well, there are many things that are available for people to trace their roots that they're not familiar with.
Oh.
And I discovered that in my travels to West Africa. I've been to West Africa 20 times. In 2005, I took a group of about 30 businessmen, political leaders, and community leaders from Alabama. And on that trip, we went to Benin. The capital of Benin is Cotonou.
Okay.
And the mayor at the time, John Smith, Pritchard, Alabama, he knew that his family, he's from the Smith family, he knew that his family was somewhere in Benin, and he discovered that they were in a little town right outside of Ouidah in Benin. And he went there and he met his family. They had pictures in a mausoleum of all their ancestors who left. Now, what most people don't know is the last ship that left the coast of West Africa that came to America was called the Clotilda, and it docked in Mobile, Alabama. And the descendants of that ship built a little town right there at the port. And today it's still standing. It's called Freedom Town. And they have a whole museum capturing all of their ancestors and their legacy in that area. And so I'm saying there are resources like that available. When I first started working with the president of Benin, that was my calling, to build a museum and to build a library so African Americans who have come from that area of West Africa can go back and trace their roots.
Okay. Wow. We've got to take a short break. We're going to come right back. I'm here with Bishop Chui from the Shrine of the Black Madonna #1, and we're going to learn a lot more about the bishop after the break, so you come on back.
Welcome to the right place for culture and history. No trip to Detroit is complete without a visit to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. The museum is the world's largest institution dedicated to the African American experience. Its 120,000 square feet are home to a variety of exhibitions and programs that explore the diversity of African American history and culture, including the interactive multi-level core exhibit and Still We Rise. Be awed by the huge glass dome over the cathedral-like Ford Freedom Rotunda and the immense ring of genealogy, ringed by nameplates of prominent African Americans. Actors bring the African American experience to life, and the museum hosts musical performances and theatrical events, along with displays of well-known artists. Rejoice, relive, and reconnect at the Charles H. Wright Museum, the right place for culture and history.
If I got to go to college, oh my goodness. I just feel like that's my destiny. You get to make like a supernova of skill or talent or whatever it is. My name is Queen, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back to From Lansing with Love. We are here again with Bishop Mbiyu Chui of the Shrine of the Black Madonna Church. Thank you again for being here.
You're welcome.
Before we went to break, you started to talk about your trip to West Africa, and I want to come back to that. But I wanted to touch on one more thing before I jumped into a little more information about you. I had this overwhelming experience at Ferris State University earlier. They have a Jim Crow exhibit. Have you had an opportunity to see that?
I haven't.
This is a field trip. This is a field trip that I think every person, not just black people, all people, if you can get to Ferris State University and see the Jim Crow exhibit, okay. I was floored. It is so overwhelming. And when you talk about your trips to West Africa or to the museum in Alabama, the lynching, to see this, because Jim Crow is a little step closer to our experience there, and to see everything from cartoons to pamphlets and political paraphernalia about President Obama.
Yeah.
And some of the things, I was horrified. I'd never seen some of the ugly things that they said about President Obama until I went to that Jim Crow exhibit. And it was traumatizing, kind of. But I was like, I feel like I need to come back. Because the first trip was like overwhelming. And then the second trip is like, now I can have a conversation. Because, and I went with other legislators, the Republicans and Democrats. It was a very mixed group. And it almost felt like, Bishop, that I was exposing, and it wasn't me, I mean, the museum is there, things in front of them and my emotions in front of that. I didn't want to do that. Yeah. And I think when we have these conversations about African Americans, the black experience going back to Africa, for some reason, it seems to be kind of stuck in a black person's experience. But it is beyond a black person's experience. Yeah. What are your thoughts about how this experience of the Quad-Centennial, Africans' contribution in America, how people who are not African American should be engaged, or should they be engaged, and the benefit for them to also understand the context of black folks in America?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the reasons that the New York Times decided to do the 1619 magazine was to address that very issue, that the story needs to be retold for everybody's sake, not just for African Americans, but for all Americans. And so a lot of inside of that magazine, they had a wide variety of writers, not all African American writers, talk about pieces of the importance of understanding this historical marker in different contexts. And a lot of them address that issue, that the narrative needs to be corrected for everybody's sake. And so I just think it has to be a teaching, educational tool. the only way you can learn is to teach, and the only way you can teach is to get it right.
Right. But what do you
So
say to a white person, a Latina person? Like, why, if they say, why should I care about the Quad-Centennial? Why should I care?
well, it's not necessarily caring about the Quad-Centennial. It's really caring about history and understanding the context that everything we do in the present is based on what happened in the past. You can't disconnect those two things. And so giving people the proper perspective and the proper context is important for everything that we do.
Yes.
So
let's get some context and perspective on you. So tell me, how did you become a bishop? What and this connection with you and Africa, West Africa in particular?
our founder, Reverend Albert B. Clegg Jr., he passed away in 2000, February 2000. And he was my mentor my whole entire adult life. I joined the church when I was 16. I was ordained as a minister at 18. I was a youth minister in the church for many, many, many years. I left Detroit in 1974, went to Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, helped start our church in Atlanta. And I was there for 15 years, running all the youth programs and all of that. Then I moved to Houston, Texas, where we also have a church, and I ran that church for about 13 years. Before I moved back to Detroit.
You're a young man. I would never know you from something take the diet plan from. That's amazing.
But when I came back to Detroit in 2000, yeah, that was the same year our founder passed. And so I had to do some soul searching. Okay, what would he have me to do to move the church forward in the 20th century? And that was my response was, you got to take the church to Africa.
Wow.
You know, we're the Pan African Orthodox Christian Church, but we're not in Africa. And so I was called by a presiding bishop, and he asked me if I would go to Africa to attend a conference in Benin in 2000. And so I went. And when I went to that conference, I got connected with the president of the country at the time, Matthew Karikou. And he had a program that he was running that he wanted me to be involved in. But I also got linked up with another organization called Pan Africa. Pan Africa is an organization of West African countries. All 15 West African countries are members of Pan Africa. And this was an organization started by Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu. And really it was about building bridges, unifying, trying to get over the religious and political barriers between West African countries. And so every year I went to Benin for 5 years just to participate in the conference and to do some of the work of unifying these West African countries. We also built schools in the rural areas of the country. And it was there that I learned about the importance of really having a Pan-African presence. So that's really what drew me to Africa. And I've been going ever since, every year. But I became a bishop just, you know, the leadership structure of our church has always been non-Protestant. In other words, we've always had cardinals, bishops. That's our leadership structure. So I was a cardinal for many, many years. And when I came back to Detroit, our presiding bishop decided to take away that layer of hierarchy in the church, and so we only have a presiding bishop, and then we have a regional bishop in each of our cities.
Okay.
So that's how I became bishop.
Wow. But your trip, you were invited to Benin, but that is also a culturally rich Mecca, and
It is.
And talk about your experience there, because have you been to South Africa too and other places?
Yes,
Okay.
I've been to South Africa.
Talk about the uniqueness.
But people don't really know how unique Benin is, and I didn't know until I traveled there many times. But when I went, one of the first places they took me was to the coast where those slave ships left, and they have a whole museum there, and they have a door of no return, but they also have a door of return.
Do they?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So they took me on the whole journey. They take you on the village that's right there by the coast. They have every marker of the stage of the journey of those Africans all the way to the ship. And they took me to each marker And then they took me all the way down to the door of no return, and they said, but you must come back so we can welcome you home. So I had to go through the door of no return and come back through the door of return. And once I did that, they took me to a ceremony. They were having a ceremony. Now, Benin is a French-speaking country. I learned Spanish all through grade school, middle school. So I didn't know any French. So they took me to the ceremony. It was thousands of people there. And they took me up on the podium and sat me, up there with the dignitaries that were speaking. They're all speaking in French. I don't know what's going on. And after this guy finishes speaking, he turns to me and asks me to come up to the microphone. And so I get up, I come up, what's going on? So he whispers in my ear. And what he said to me was, we have just made a formal apology on behalf of all Africans for selling our brothers and sisters into slavery. And we would like you to accept our apology.
Oh, wow.
And so I was very floored. I was just awestruck.
Yeah.
And so I accepted his apology. But every year I found out they have this celebration of peace and reconciliation on January 15th in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. But it was really about repairing those bridges and building a sense of unification. And what the president told me at that ceremony was there could be no peace, there could be no healing in Africa until we reconcile those relationships.
We're taking care of us first.
Yes.
We have to have those internal conversations and, as they say, come to Jesus moments just within. Bishop Chui, I feel like we have not even tapped the tip of this iceberg at all, because I know that you are just a wealth of information and experience, and unfortunately I only have a 30-minute show, but I know that you are very active, the Shrine of Black Madonna in the church, and you do a lot of nonprofit and community outreach. Is there anything else where people can get involved or learn more, not just about Africans in America, but just the cultural experience, how to just be better people that you want to share?
Okay, so we partner with several organizations, and another hat that I wear, I do a lot of prison ministry. So I'm all over the state of Michigan, going into prisons, doing a lot of education. I'm an educator. That's what I do everywhere I go. So I do education in the prison, but I also have another day job working with returning citizens.
Oh, wow. That's
and
huge.
I do that through Goodwill, and the program's called Flip the Script.
Yes.
I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes, and we're trying to get funding in the budget for Flip the Script. That was cut in those budget cuts, and we are definitely working to get that back.
So it's really about collaboration and partnering with other people. None of us can do it all by ourselves.
Right.
We need to work together on all different levels, on either side of the aisle. We need to work together.
Well, we're going to get you in Lansing more often, because this administration, the Gretchen administration, and the legislature is really moving forward. And I'm sure this year, because we just passed the Raise the Age bill package, and we're doing a lot of reform, or criminal justice reform. And so I think it'd be great to have you back in committee to testify about recidivism and incarceration, and how we can rehabilitate and prepare folks for better opportunities, because it's a lot out here.
Absolutely.
And we need people. Thank you so much
Thank you for
your
having
presence, your time, your talent, and your light, and I'm just honored to just sit with you and have this conversation. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And that's about all the time we have. I can't thank Bishop Chui of the Shrine of Michigan, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, the Pan African Orthodox Christian Church in Detroit, for joining us, and thank all of you. You see, I'm flustered. I'm just overwhelmed, because there are so many things inside of me that I want to say, and just want to continue to have this conversation. But if you have any ideas for a show, please contact my office, and that contact information will be on the screen. So until next time, be good to yourself and each other. And with that, we're all clear and out of here. Goodbye.